There's an alley in Arlen, Texas. It runs behind a row of houses on Rainy Street, and for most of the day, it's just an alley. Concrete, fence posts, the occasional smell of something Hank Hill would describe as not right. But in the evenings, when the sun starts to drop and the Texas heat becomes something you can almost tolerate, 4 men gather there with cans of Alamo beer and talk about nothing very much. Hank Hill, upright and well-meaning. Bill Dauterive, sad in a very specific way. Boomhauer, completely impossible to fully understand. And then there's the 4th man, the one who is almost always wearing sunglasses despite it being 9 o'clock at night. The one with a cigarette in his hand and a look on his face that suggests he's worked out something the rest of us haven't caught up to yet. That's Dale Alvin Gribble, and tonight we're going to spend a long time with him. This video is exactly what it says it is. Every Dale Gribble theory, every bit of lore, every strange corner of his character and his history, all laid out at a pace that's appropriate for late at night when you're not really going anywhere. We'll go through his alias, his conspiracy theories, his family, the question that fans of the show have been debating for years, and a few other things besides. There's no particular rush. King of the Hill ran for 13 seasons across 13 years, with a revival currently underway. And Dale has been in virtually all of it, doing something odd and interesting. There's plenty of material and nowhere else to be. If this is the kind of video you want to find yourself waking up to, the kind where someone talks at a reasonable pace about a character they find genuinely fascinating, then subscribing is probably worth your time. New videos like this go up regularly, and it's free. But for now, let's go back to Arlen. Let's stand in that alley, and let's talk about the man in the sunglasses. So, Dale Gribble. The first thing worth knowing is that his physical appearance was modeled after Hunter S. Thompson. That's a piece of production trivia that gets mentioned occasionally, and I find it completely delightful, because once you know it, you can't unknow it. The sunglasses, the hat, the vague sense that this man has sources for things and that those sources are somewhat questionable, it all clicks into place. Mike Judge and Greg Daniels weren't just drawing a paranoid neighbor, they were drawing a very specific kind of American figure, the gonzo journalist. The man who believes the system is rotten at the core and has committed fully to saying so, regardless of what anyone thinks. Of course, the comparison only goes so far. Hunter S. Thompson had a lot of conspicuous talent. Dale Gribble's resume includes extermination work, a brief and surprisingly successful stint as a corporate hatchet man, and a low-power radio station that served, by his own description, the entire Tri-House area. These are not exactly the same things, but the energy is recognizable. The posture of someone who has seen through the lie of polite society and is not especially interested in pretending otherwise. His full name is Dale Alvin Gribble. He was born on July 12th, and he's 47 for most of the show's original run. Though you'd never peg him at any particular age, he has the timeless quality of a man who has simply always been this way. He's married to Nancy Hicks Gribble, a local news weather girl and eventually anchor at Channel 84. He has a son named Joseph. He runs a pest extermination business called Dale's Dead Bug, which is technically registered in Liberia rather than the United States, which is either an elaborate tax avoidance strategy or just the kind of thing Dale does without fully thinking through the implications, possibly both. He drives a white Dodge Caravan with a large fiberglass queen ant mounted on the roof. The ant can be rotated to appear either dead or alive, which is frankly a brilliant piece of mobile advertising that Dale seems to take entirely for granted. He is, by most measures, one of the more memorable characters to come out of American animation in the last 30 years. And the reason for that, I think, is the paradox at the heart of him. Here's the thing about Dale. He is a man who suspects everything. He distrusts the government with a fervor that most people reserve for genuine personal betrayal. He has theories about the Postal Service, about fluoride, about the United Nations, about barcodes, about the moon. He monitors his incoming calls. He uses a fake identity for most official transactions. He has presumably thought more carefully about surveillance, control, and institutional deception than the vast majority of people alive. and yet the most obvious and significant fact in his immediate life, the one happening in his own house, involving his own wife, producing his own supposed son, this he cannot see at all. The show built its entire handling of Dale around that central irony. Whenever there is a real conspiracy happening in his vicinity, Dale misreads it completely. Whenever someone is actually deceiving him in a meaningful way, he comes up with an alternative explanation that involves aliens or government programs or some other mechanism his brain finds more comfortable. The paranoid man is entirely blind to the one thing that deserves his paranoia. The setup sounds like pure comedy, and it genuinely is. Some of the show's sharpest running gags live in the distance between what Dale is watching for and what's directly in front of him. But spending enough time with a character, the joke starts to feel like it has something underneath it, something the show is quietly making a point about. That the energy Dale puts into mapping the global surveillance state leaves him with almost no attention for the man who keeps showing up at his house to see his wife. We'll get into all of that properly in a later section. For now, just hold on to the paradox. It's the key to everything about him. His voice for most of the show's original run was Johnny Hardwick, a comedian who came up through stand-up before landing in the King of the Hill writer's room, then ended up voicing the character after negotiations with Daniel Stern fell through. Hardwick died in August 2023 at 64, which was a real loss, because his voice was genuinely irreplaceable. That specific nasal rasp, the barely contained excitement whenever Dale has just had an idea, the way he could make complete nonsense sound like someone who had really done their research. Toby Huss took over for the revival and by all accounts has approached it with enormous care, but we'll talk about that later. The other main characters who orbit Dale are worth briefly introducing because Dale makes no sense in isolation. Hank Hill is his close friend and next-door neighbor, a man of such profound decency and conventional values that his friendship with Dale is either a testament to loyalty or a complete mystery, depending on how you look at it. Bill Dauterive is the sad one, a divorced man who lives with his grief about as well as you'd expect. And Boomhauer is the one nobody can quite understand. He speaks in a fast, mumbled drawl that only the other characters seem to follow without difficulty, which is its own kind of conspiracy if you think about it hard enough. They stand in the alley and drink an Alamo beer. That is largely what they do. And within that extremely modest framework, Dale manages to be one of the most interesting people in the show. He can only bench press 35 pounds, by the way. That comes up in the Texas Skill Saw Massacre, and I feel like it's worth mentioning early because it reframes everything about his extremely aggressive posture toward the world. Here's a man who will go toe-to-toe with the federal government in his own head, who has militarized his home and stockpiled supplies and printed his own currency, and he can lift 35 pounds. There's something endearing about that ratio. His catchphrase, the one he deploys when a plan comes together or a sudden move pays off, is a kind of fast, barely phonetic ch-sh-shy that you have to hear rather than read. He also says wingo when excited, and sugo when he wants to move quickly, and gee when something feeds into his paranoid worldview in an unexpected way, which is often, he is genuinely a lot, but he's a lot in a way that rewards spending time with. Let's talk about Rusty Shackelford. If you've watched King of the Hill even casually, you've heard the name. It's the alias Dale uses for anything he wants to do without leaving a trace of himself, ordering pizza, collecting unemployment, dealing with anything that might create a paper trail the government could follow. Rusty Shackelford is Dale's way of moving through official systems while technically not existing in them. The first time he uses it on screen is at a Mason lawnmower seminar, which tells you a lot about how fully he's committed to this. It's not just for genuinely sensitive transactions, it's for everything. He uses it at a gun show and then immediately tells someone standing nearby his real name. He uses it when ordering a pizza and then, minutes later, describes to the same pizza place a vehicle that can only be his. The alias defeats itself constantly because Dale can't quite sustain the fiction of not being Dale for more than a few minutes at a time. but the intent is absolutely sincere. The backstory he gives is that the name belongs to a classmate who died when they were young. This is, it turns out, a real thing that people have done. It's sometimes called ghosting, or more formally, identity theft through deceased individuals. The idea is that you find the name of someone who died young before they accumulated much of a life record, and you take their birth certificate and start building a second identity from it. It's a method with genuine criminal history behind it, and the King of the Hill writers clearly knew this. The level of specificity in Dale's explanation that he has a birth certificate for someone who died in 1953, that the identity has hardly been used, reads like research rather than invention. It also implies that Dale thought about this quite carefully at some point, that there was a version of Dale, probably younger, who sat down and worked out the mechanics of identity replacement, which tells you something about how long this paranoia has been running. This isn't a recent decision. This is infrastructure. Here's what makes the whole Rusty Shackelford arc particularly interesting. In the season 11 episode, Peggy's Gone to Pots, it comes out that Rusty Shackelford didn't actually die. He just moved away when they were in primary school. The real Rusty Shackelford, a living man, perfectly alive, turns up in Arlen to deal with the fact that someone has been using his name for years, generating identity trouble and a paper trail of peculiar transactions. He wants it stopped, understandably. What this reveal means is that Dale's entire system, the fake name, the borrowed identity, the infrastructure built on the assumption of a childhood classmate's death, was built on something that wasn't true. Rusty didn't die. He moved to another town. And Dale, the man who questions everything, apparently never thought to verify this central fact. He assumed as a child that when Rusty wasn't around anymore, Rusty must be dead. It didn't occur to him to consider that people sometimes just move. There's something almost touching about that, in a strange way. Young Dale, who was clearly already running conspiracy theories in some form, encountered an absence and reached for the most dramatic explanation. He didn't know how to account for ordinary change. Something missing had to be gone forever. The episode also reveals, almost in passing, that Dale has been smoking Manitoba cigarettes since he was in 3rd grade, since he was 8 or 9 years old. The real Rusty Shackelford knows this because of the records that have piled up under his name. So Dale has been smoking his whole life, essentially. He's been doing this since childhood. And if that's true, then all the other things, the paranoia, the fake identity, the distrust of institutions, probably go back almost as far. One of the show's fan wikis notes that this implies Dale was always a conspiracy theorist, even as a child, because he explained Rusty's absence as death rather than considering the more ordinary possibility. And if he could figure out that adults lied about death, he'd probably already figured out that other reassuring things adults said, Santa being real, the government having your best interests at heart, might be worth questioning too. There's a smaller but equally fun Rusty Shackelford detail that comes up in The Exterminator. The award plaque for Dale's Dead Bug Employee of the Year has Dale Gribble listed for every year except one, 1996, where Rusty Shackelford appears instead. So for 1 year, at some point, Dale apparently decided that even within the fiction of his own one-man company, he deserved to be recognized under his alias. He gave himself an award in a fake name, inside a business that only employs him. The scope of commitment required for that is frankly impressive. After the real Rusty shows up and they sort out the various identity complications, Dale still keeps using the alias, which is a strange thing to lose from the show, honestly. Rusty Shackelford had become one of those character details that was woven into everything. The show was brave to actually follow through on the consequence of the alias, but there's a small Dale-shaped hole in the texture of the series after that episode. One last thing on Rusty Shackelford. He uses it when ordering pizza, not just for consequential things. Pizza. The amount of energy Dale puts into being officially invisible when ordering a pizza, a transaction that requires giving an address, which is his own actual address, is the whole character in miniature. He wants to be untraceable. he orders dinner, he gives them directions to his house. The system works perfectly. All right, let's do the theories. This is probably what most people think of when they think of Dale Gribble, the actual content of his worldview, the specific shape that his paranoia takes when given a microphone and an audience of 3 mildly tolerant men with beers. Over 13 seasons of the original run, Dale produced a remarkable volume of conspiratorial thinking, and it's worth going through some of the highlights because they range from things that are almost plausible to things that are absolutely not, and the way they're arranged tells you a lot about how Dale's mind works. Start with the weather. In the very first episode of the show, on a hot Texas summer day when everyone is already miserable, Dale explains to Hank and Tina that the United Nations controls the weather remotely. Global warming in Dale's framework is not a climate phenomenon, it's a plot. The UN is deliberately heating up the world as part of a broader plan to control populations. Hank responds to this the way Hank responds to most Dale theories, with the patience of a man who has heard a lot of Dale theories and says something to the effect that if it gets any hotter, he's going to kick Dale's backside. The theory doesn't get properly rebutted so much as it gets ignored. The thing about the UN weather control theory is that it establishes the template for almost everything Dale believes. There's always a governing body, there's always a hidden mechanism, there's always a purpose behind the apparent randomness of the world. And that purpose is always sinister. Nothing just happens because of physics or human nature or bad luck. Everything is arranged. Then there's the Beast. The Beast is a global information conspiracy controlled by computers, a sentient system designed to collect personal data on every person alive. Dale introduces this in Hank's Dirty Laundry and presents it with the confidence of someone who has spent a great deal of time researching the subject. The computers are collecting everything. The data is being compiled. Everyone's information is being harvested by a centralized intelligence that none of us control or fully understand. In 1998, when that episode aired, this was presented as classic Dale nonsense. The kind of thing you'd expect a man with a fake identity and a Liberian registered extermination company to believe. It got a laugh. The Beast is part of the joke. The Beast is worth its own conversation. We'll get to it. Moving along. Dale's theory on peanut allergies is a personal favorite. When confronted with the increasing prevalence of peanut allergies in the world, Dale offers the following explanation to a room of psychiatrists who are, in fairness, completely unequipped for this. The peanuts are emitting toxins as an evolutionary defense mechanism. They're tired of being eaten, and now they're fighting back. This is presented in Dale's delivery as simply obvious. He says it the way someone would say a settled fact. And then everyone in the room is quiet for a moment, which is actually the correct response. I love this theory, not because it has any basis in reality, but because the internal logic is, in a peculiar way, coherent. If you grant Dale's premise that organisms adapt to survive, then peanuts developing toxins to deter consumption is at least following a Darwinian framework. He's applied the right kind of thinking to an observation. He's just started from a completely wrong set of facts and arrived at a completely wrong conclusion while using roughly the right method. That's Dale's relationship with reasoning in miniature. The postal service, the pizza, the kidneys. This one requires a bit of setup. When Hank is having difficulty with the post office and the DMV, Dale explains the actual situation to him. The U.S. Postal Service is bogged down in the most elaborate PSYOPs campaign in history, he begins, which is a reasonable enough opening. Then, first they fatten us up with all those 2-for-1 pizza coupons. Then, when we're too logy to put up a fight, they sell us off to the Red Cross, who removes our kidneys, which go back on the pizzas to start the process all over again. So the pizza coupons are the first stage of a kidney harvesting operation run jointly by the Postal Service and the Red Cross, with the kidneys returning to circulation via the pizza supply chain. It's a closed loop. Dale has thought about this. What I find genuinely interesting about this one is not the conclusion, obviously, but the structure. Dale has connected institutions that most people would never connect. He's thought about the relationship between government services, food delivery, and medical procurement. He has, in a sense, done more lateral thinking about the postal service than most people do in their lifetime. Just, again, very wrong about what the connections mean. Then there's the clone. At some point, in order to get out of a confrontation with Hank, Dale produces the following explanation for his behavior. So it turns out I'm not the actual Dale Gribble, but a clone of him. The original Dale Gribble is a super warrior from the year 2087. The second me, that is I, was created to help the first me fight the invading Mongol armies. Hank responds to this with a punch to the arm, which Dale accepts as a reasonable reaction. The 2087 warrior theory is structurally rather elegant. It explains everything about Dale by recontextualizing him as a being out of time, sent back for a purpose, which means his apparently erratic behavior is actually strategically appropriate for a future conflict the rest of us can't see yet. It absolves him of every current failure by situating his real purpose in the future. Dale is probably the most optimistic about this theory of anyone in his immediate social circle, though admittedly none of them believe it at all. He has also questioned whether Hawaii actually exists. There is, in his view, no proof. I find this endearing rather than alarming. Hawaii is quite far from Texas. The Egyptian pyramids come up in Texas City Twister, where Dale hints at his belief that the pyramids originally had large flat tops and rested on their points, and that the Egyptians used a winch, a cinder block, and 50,000 Hebrew slaves to untip them into their current orientation. The casual detail of the cinder block in this otherwise ancient scenario is extraordinary. The pyramids were tipped and then untipped using a cinder block, presumably sourced locally. And then there's the JFK assassination episode where Dale pores over official reports and evidence in order to confirm his theories. He goes. He does the research on the ground, he visits every location, he follows the evidence step by step with genuine commitment and thoroughness. And when he finally reaches the end of the trail and arrives at his conclusion, the conclusion is, of course, completely wrong. I won't spoil it for people who haven't seen it, but the journey is done with such sincerity that it's almost moving regardless of where it ends up. That's Dale's conspiracy work in general, really. Sincere, thorough, systematically misapplied. He's not lazy about this. He does not take shortcuts. He goes to Dallas. He monitors his incoming calls. He has a birth certificate for Rusty Shackelford. The effort is real. The framework is just pointed entirely in the wrong direction. There's one more that deserves mention, which is his theory about Pfizer. He calls them Pooh Pfizer, and the government testing deadly placebo drugs on Bill in order to create super soldiers capable of surviving Arctic conditions in preparation for a Soviet invasion from the North Pole. There are so many things wrong with this theory that it's hard to know where to start, but the part I keep thinking about is that Dale's concern is for Bill. He genuinely worries about what they might be doing to his friend. The paranoia is wrapped around something real. He cares about these people, it just expresses itself in a completely unusable form. What you'd actually want if you were Dale's friend is for that same attentiveness and concern to be pointed at something real and present. And occasionally it is, just not usually. I mentioned the beast in the last section, and I want to come back to it now because it's the single most interesting example of what happens when you leave a Dale Gribble theory in a drawer for 25 years and then open it again. In 1998, Dale's description of a global computer system collecting personal data on every citizen, a centralized intelligence harvesting information without people's full knowledge or consent, was presented as paranoid nonsense. It was part of the joke. Dale believes absurd things. The beast is an absurd thing. Move on. Then 2013 happened, and Edward Snowden published documents showing the scope of the NSA's domestic surveillance programs, and everyone collectively adjusted their sense of what absurd means. Then the years after that happened, and it turned out that the major technology platforms were doing almost exactly what Dale described, except voluntarily and with a business model attached. Your data is being collected, it goes somewhere. A lot of different entities know a great deal about you based on your digital behavior. The beast is just called Google now, and it has a much better logo. I'm not suggesting King of the Hill was making a serious political prediction. The show was making a joke. But the joke aged in a direction nobody fully anticipated. And now watching Dale explain the beast feels less like watching someone be funny and more like watching someone accidentally read a room from 6 years in the future. And it holds across his whole worldview when you look at it honestly. Dale's specific claims are almost always wrong. The Postal Service is not harvesting kidneys. Pfizer was not creating Arctic super soldiers. Peanuts are not engaging in evolutionary warfare. But his general thesis that large institutions collect power, that governments do things they don't tell people about, that personal data is being used in ways people haven't consented to, has a fair amount of historical support behind it. The United States government ran MK Ultra, a real program in which the CIA conducted mind control experiments on citizens without their knowledge or consent, often using LSD. This happened. It went on for years. The Tuskegee study, in which the U.S. Public Health Service withheld treatment from black men with syphilis over decades in order to study the disease's progression, is documented history. COINTELPRO was a real FBI program that surveilled and disrupted civil rights organizations. The Church Committee investigations in the 1970s revealed a remarkable amount of intelligence community activity that the public had no idea was happening. None of this is conspiracy theory. It's documented, acknowledged history. And Dale, the man who thinks peanuts are fighting back and the pyramids were flipped with a cinder block, is essentially pointing at the same kind of institutional behavior, just in a completely distorted way. The interesting thing isn't that Dale is right. He isn't, mostly. The interesting thing is that the kind of distrust his worldview is built on isn't entirely without historical basis. When he says, the government has run secret programs on citizens without their knowledge, the historically accurate response isn't, no, it hasn't. The accurate response is more like, yes, but that doesn't mean your specific theory about Bill and the placebo Arctic super soldiers is correct. The shape of his concern is sometimes real. The feeling he puts inside it almost never is. There's a specific episode that gets cited regularly when people talk about Dale's predictions aging into relevance. The Beast episode. Researchers and podcasters who cover King of the Hill have noted that this aired in the late 90s at a time when the internet was barely embedded in daily life. And yet Dale was describing something that sounds, in retrospect, like a reasonably accurate description of what the data economy became. Not the supernatural version he believed in. The beast isn't a single sentient intelligence, but the functional description of computers being used to collect and correlate personal data at scale. That part aged rather well. One last example. Dale has expressed concerns over the years about organ harvesting, framed in his typically wild way. The Red Cross, the pizza, the kidneys, the whole circuit. But the fact that there are documented, genuine concerns about illegal organ trafficking in the world means that even this theory, insane as the specific framing is gesturing at something real that exists somewhere. Just not at the Arlen Pizza Hut. What I take from all of this is that Dale's paranoia isn't wrong about the existence of institutional bad faith. It's wrong about almost every specific instance of it. He has the right antenna and the wrong calibration. He can detect the general frequency of deception, the sense that powerful institutions aren't always honest about what they're doing, but he can't lock onto the signal. He picks up static and calls it a transmission, which is honestly more interesting as a character than if he were simply wrong about everything. The grain of truth buried in the noise is what makes Dale Gribble's worldview genuinely complex rather than just funny. Dale's relationship with his father is one of the stranger and more quietly moving subplots in the show, and it's worth spending some time with because it tells you something about where Dale might have come from. His father's name is Bug Gribble, and for most of the original run of King of the Hill, Dale and Bug are estranged. They haven't spoken for years. The reason, as Dale understands it, is that on the day of Dale and Nancy's wedding, Bug kissed Nancy on the lips at the reception. Dale saw it. He interpreted it the obvious way, that his father was making a move on his wife on their wedding day, and that was that. The relationship ended. Decades of distance followed. The actual reason Bug kissed Nancy is considerably more complicated, and not at all what Dale thought. Bug Gribble is gay. He had been flirting with a Filipino caterer at the wedding, and sensing that Dale was about to enter the room and that his flirtation was about to be visible, he panicked and grabbed the nearest woman in a dress to cover for himself. That woman was Nancy. So the incident that ended the Gribble father-son relationship for decades was not an act of betrayal. It was a gay man in an era when he felt he couldn't be out to his own son, desperately trying to hide something true about himself from the person he loved. The misunderstanding is genuinely tragic when you look at it clearly. Two people lost years of their relationship because one of them was afraid of being seen for who he actually was, and the other reached the worst possible conclusion and never questioned it. What happens when Bug eventually comes back into Dale's life is a perfect piece of King of the Hill writing. Nancy arranges for Bug to be invited to their vow renewal ceremony 20 years after the wedding. Bug arrives with a partner, and Dale, encountering his father's unusual behavior and the presence of this mysterious companion, works out exactly what most people would work out immediately, which is not what Dale works out at all. Dale concludes that Bug is an undercover government agent, and that the partner is part of his cover. Of course he does, because when Dale is confronted with evidence of something real and personal, something that would require him to update his understanding of someone he loves, his brain reaches for the institutional explanation first. It's not that his father is gay and has a partner and has been living a hidden life. It's that his father's a spy. The government is involved. There's a conspiracy. The resolution comes when Bug and his partner share a devoted, affectionate kiss. And Dale finally just accepts the truth. He doesn't make a production of it. He delivers a brief, casual little speech when he accepts Bug's sexuality. He sees it and he accepts it, and something between him and his father gets mended. It's a small moment, and the show doesn't linger on it, which is exactly right. The best moments in King of the Hill tend not to announce themselves. What the Bug storyline adds to the understanding of Dale is this. He grew up with a father who was concealing something essential about himself. Bug was living a hidden life under Dale's nose for Dale's entire childhood. And if Dale, from a young age, had a sense that adults weren't quite what they presented themselves as, that there was something underneath the official story, well, he wasn't entirely wrong. He was just applying that instinct in completely the wrong directions for the rest of his life. I'm not suggesting that Bug's sexuality caused Dale's conspiracy theories. That would be too neat, and the show is too smart for that. But there's a texture to Dale's background that makes the paranoia feel like it grew out of something real, even if it grew into something strange. He was a kid who sensed that people around him weren't being fully honest. He was right about that much. The show also confirms, through the real Rusty Shackelford's appearance, that Dale was already doing versions of this as a child. He was already constructing alternative explanations for things he couldn't see clearly. He was, as the fan wiki notes, always a conspiracy nut, even as a child. The foundation was there before he had any tools to act on it. One of the more interesting fan readings of Bug Gribble is that his eventual peace with Dale, the vow renewal resolution, the accepted kiss, represents something Dale almost never gets in the show. Actual clarity about something he had misread for a long time. Most of Dale's misreadings don't get corrected. The ones about Joseph don't get corrected. The ones about the government don't get corrected, but Bug's situation gets corrected, gently and without drama, and Dale simply adjusts, which suggests he's capable of it. When the evidence is clear enough and personal enough and right in front of him, he can see it. That's not a small thing for this character. Let's take some time with this one because it's the question the show's fan base has spent the most time on. and it deserves a proper explanation first. Dale's wife Nancy has been having an affair, a long affair, 14 years by the show's own accounting, though some recaps say it was closer to 13, and the exact number shifts slightly depending on the episode. Either way, the better part of a decade and a half. The man she's been having this affair with is John Redcorn, a Native American healer who has been visiting the house ostensibly to treat Nancy's migraines through traditional healing methods. The result of this 14-year affair is Joseph Gribble, Dale's son, except, of course, that Joseph is not biologically Dale's son, he's John Redcorn's. This is made completely clear by the show, not through explicit statement, but through the fact that Joseph looks exactly like John Redcorn. They have the same coloring, the same hair, the same jawline, the same general physical presence. Joseph's middle name is, just to add a bit of seasoning to the situation, John, as in John Redcorn. Nancy's explanation for Joseph's complexion is that Dale has a Jamaican grandmother, which is the kind of explanation that requires everyone within earshot to be very motivated not to ask follow-up questions. Joseph himself doesn't know. He grows up regarding Redcorn as strange and a bit creepy, which is its own small tragedy, given that Redcorn's awkward attempts to be near his son are coming from a very real place. And Dale doesn't know, or does he? This is the question that's been running through the King of the Hill fan community since approximately the beginning of the show, and it doesn't have a clean answer, which is part of why it's so interesting to think about. Let's start with a case that Dale genuinely doesn't know. The most compelling evidence for this is an entire episode built around it. Season 6, Episode 14, of Mice and Little Green Men. In this episode, Dale works out that Joseph cannot biologically be his son. The math doesn't add up. He was away during the relevant period. He doesn't say any of this to Nancy because what Dale does instead is reach a completely different conclusion. After sitting with the evidence and doing the calculations, Dale concludes that Joseph is the biological son of an alien. Nancy, in this reading, was impregnated by extraterrestrial life, and Joseph is the alien's child. This is Dale's answer to the mystery. There's a crucial thing about this episode. John Redcorn absolutely factors into it, both visually and in Dale's reasoning. Dale doesn't look at Redcorn and then at Joseph and then back again. He doesn't connect those dots. His mind goes to aliens instead. And if the theory that Dale knows and is playing along were true, you'd expect Redcorn to be somewhere in Dale's thinking during this episode. He isn't. The episode's entire logic works better if Dale sincerely doesn't know and sincerely arrived at aliens on his own. The Tumblr blog Hill of the Hank, which does very good analytical work on this show, argues this case well. I truly believe it was more logical for Dale to look at his son and explain away the differences between them and the timing of his conception as being aliens rather than the possibility that Nancy had an affair. Dale's worldview is built around the premise that the surface explanation is always the wrong one. Given a choice between "my wife had an affair," which is a very ordinary human domestic explanation, and "my son was fathered by an alien," which is extraordinary and involves forces beyond normal human agency, Dale's brain will choose the alien every time. It's how he's wired. That argument makes a lot of sense. Now let's look at the case the other way. Dale has, by his own account, been monitoring all incoming calls. He listens to everything. If that's true, and with Dale, you have to take his operational security seriously because it's genuinely elaborate, then he almost certainly heard Nancy's conversations with John Redcorn at some point during 14 years of phone calls. He couldn't have missed all of them. There's also a specific moment that fans return to frequently. At some point in the show, John Redcorn is caught sneaking into the Gribble house through a window. When Dale finds him, Redcorn essentially braces himself. He assumes he's been caught, that this is the moment everything comes out. He says something to the effect that he regrets Dale finding out this way. And Dale's response is, nothing, really. He gives no reaction. He doesn't put anything together, he just moves on. After this, Redcorn reportedly observes that Dale's complete and intentional obliviousness to the situation really takes the fun out of it. The word intentional is doing a lot of work there. Redcorn reads Dale's non-reaction as a choice, not an accident. And then there's the practical argument. Dale watches Bill go through his divorce and sees in enormous detail what that process does to a man. Bill loses weight, then gains it back. He loses his health, his self-respect, his capacity to function socially. His entire life contracts around the fact of the ended marriage. Dale, living next door to that, would have a very clear picture of what confronting the affair would cost him. His life is comfortable, Nancy earns well, he has Joseph. He has the alley and the beer and the friends. Everything that makes his life livable sits inside the marriage. The question isn't whether Dale can work out the truth. The question might be whether Dale has decided, somewhere below conscious awareness, that the truth is the one thing he cannot afford to follow to its conclusion. Here's where I personally land on this, after thinking about it for longer than is probably sensible. The alien theory is probably sincere. Dale's mind genuinely went there, and he probably genuinely believes it, in the way Dale genuinely believes most things. But the non-reaction to Redcorn in the window is harder to explain away. That reads like a man who, on some level, knew what was in front of him and chose not to see it. The most interesting reading, the one that does justice to the complexity of Dale as a character, is that he's not doing either of these things deliberately. He's not consciously protecting himself by pretending. He's not cynically playing along. What he's doing is the thing his brain always does, reaching for the explanation that fits his worldview rather than the one that fits reality. His worldview says aliens exist and do things. His worldview does not have room for Nancy cheating on him. So one explanation is available to him and one isn't. The man who questions everything has one thing he can't question. He's built an entire elaborate epistemology, complete with fake identities and monitored phone lines and survival bunkers, and at the center of it there is one blind spot that all of that infrastructure quietly protects. That's not comedy, or rather it's comedy and something else at the same time. Since we're talking about the affair and everything around it, it's worth spending some time with John Redcorn as his own person, because his situation in the show is more complicated and more interesting than it might first appear. John Redcorn is a Native American healer and musician. He's physically striking, tall, broadly built, with long dark hair and a kind of composed, unhurried presence that makes him stand out in Arlen, in the way that anyone who doesn't particularly need anything from Arlen tends to stand out there. He's voiced by Jonathan Joss, and his delivery has a quality of controlled amusement to it, like someone who has long since made his peace with the absurdity of his situation. His arrangement with Nancy began as something straightforward. He was treating her migraines. The traditional healing sessions became something else over 14 years, and the result was Joseph. This is the basic scaffold. What makes Redcorn's position more than just the other man in the marriage is his relationship to Joseph, which is one of the more genuinely melancholy through lines in the show's later seasons. He knows Joseph is his son, he can see it, it's obvious, and he cannot say it, cannot claim it, cannot approach his own child directly, because to do so would destroy Nancy's marriage and upend Joseph's entire understanding of who he is. So what Redcorn does instead is try to get close to Joseph in ways that don't require explaining himself. And Joseph finds him strange and a bit creepy because the attempts are awkward in a way that's hard to avoid when you can't give the real reason for your interest. There's something quite sad about that. A man who can see his son clearly, who can recognize his own features in the boy's face, who cannot do any of the things that come naturally to a parent because none of the framing that would make those things make sense is available to him. The affair ends, and this is genuinely one of the more quietly surprising things the show does, because of John Redcorn's own decision rather than Nancy's. He befriends Dale, the two of them spend time together, end up having a real friendship, and Redcorn finds that he can't continue the affair once Dale is real to him as a person. he refuses to come back to Nancy. In his own words, it's out of respect for Dale. Dale, who doesn't know any of this, who doesn't know his friendship with Redcorn is what saved his marriage, who would probably have a theory about Redcorn involving surveillance drones if he ever found out. Dale is the reason the affair stopped through the simple mechanism of being a decent enough person to be friends with. That's the thing about Dale and John Redcorn's relationship. It's real. Whatever else is complicated about it, whatever layers of irony surround it, the friendship is genuine. Redcorn genuinely likes Dale, enough to upend his own situation out of respect for him. Joseph has a half-sister through Redcorn's later relationship with a woman named Charlene. The daughter is named Kate. What's particularly interesting about Kate is that, according to the show, she's very similar to Joseph in personality and interests. Two children of the same biological father, raised in completely different environments, ending up alike. The show doesn't make a big thing of this, but it's there. The revival, season 14, adds a wrinkle that's been noted by people who've seen it. Nancy and John Redcorn appear to have rekindled something, and they're also working together on a home-selling video blog. The show doesn't confirm this explicitly, but it's heavily implied, which means the affair that ended because Redcorn befriended Dale may have eventually restarted anyway, now that the friendship has presumably had years to settle into something familiar. That's left deliberately ambiguous, and I think that's the right choice. Some things in King of the Hill are better without clean resolution. One last thing about Redcorn, the recurring gag in the early seasons where whenever Dale says something about being Joseph's father, Redcorn would appear, physically appear, as if summoned. The joke was visual and quick and always got the laugh it was going for. But there's something underneath it that's quietly terrible. Every time Dale declares his fatherhood with pride, Redcorn is literally right there, listening, unable to say anything. The universe, or at least the show's version of it, is constructed so that Redcorn has to witness, repeatedly, Dale claiming the role that should be his. Comedy can do that sometimes. It can be funny and genuinely painful at the same time without trying very hard. Whatever the biology says, and by this point in the video you know exactly what the biology says, Dale Gribble is genuinely, sincerely, completely Joseph's dad. That's the strange thing the show does with this situation. It sets up a classic dramatic irony. The audience knows something the character doesn't, and that knowledge creates comedy, and then, over the course of the show's run, it turns that irony into something that doesn't quite fit the comic register it started in. Because Dale's love for Joseph is real. It's one of the most unambiguous things about him. In a character full of contradictions and misdirections and things that are not what they seem, his relationship with his son is clear. The show consistently portrays Dale's love for Joseph throughout the series. The most undeniable fact about Dale, beyond the cigarettes and the sunglasses and the alias, is that he loves Joseph. How he expresses that love is very Dale. It involves a lot of projects that are not quite right for a 13-year-old. In Vision Quest, Dale's desire to make Joseph cool, to connect with him, to give him something valuable nearly leads to Joseph killing a helpless panda bear. That's not a sentence I expected to type, but here we are. In another episode, Dale's attempts to earn Joseph's respect create a minor wave of vandalism that actually makes Joseph more rebellious rather than less. The intentions are always present. The execution frequently goes sideways. There's a detail that fans often return to. Joseph's middle name is John. Joseph John Gribble. John Redcorn's first name, given to the boy as a middle name. It's the kind of detail that could have been a coincidence if the show had been less deliberate. But King of the Hill is a very deliberate show. Nancy chose that name, presumably for reasons she couldn't say out loud, and it's there in every document Joseph ever signs. One of the things the show does that's genuinely interesting is track how Joseph develops as a person and who he ends up resembling. The expectation would be that he'd take after his biological father in meaningful ways. John Redcorn's physical presence, his composed manner, his particular approach to the world. And physically, Joseph does. He's tall and dark and clearly not Dale Gribble's genetic offspring, but in personality, in the specific texture of who Joseph becomes, he takes after Dale. Joseph gets progressively weirder and more eccentric as the seasons go on. He becomes interested in some of the things Dale likes, but also develops plenty of his own interests. He gets dim-witted in the specific ways that feel like something you'd pick up from a household rather than inherit. He is more and more a Gribble. This is either the show making a quietly powerful point about nurture over nature, that who raises you shapes you more profoundly than biology does, or it's the show being funny about the irony of the situation. It might be both. King of the Hill often does two things at once without calling attention to either. What it definitely is, regardless of interpretation, is a testament to the fact that fatherhood is mostly a practice rather than a status. Dale does the work. He shows up. He has opinions about Joseph's life and plans for Joseph's development and worries about Joseph's future that are all calibrated completely wrong but are coming from a real place. He is present in his own peculiar way. John Redcorn, the biological father, watches this from next door. He can see his own features in Joseph's face. He knows the truth. And the boy who carries his genes, his coloring, his name as a middle name, that boy thinks of the paranoid exterminator in the orange cap as his dad. That's not played for drama in King of the Hill. It's part of the texture of the show, the accumulation of things that are just true and present and not particularly resolved. But if you let yourself think about it for a moment, it's a genuinely complex piece of human territory for a cartoon to be inhabiting. Dale's fatherhood is wrong about everything factual and right about everything that matters. That's a strange place to end up, and the show earns it. There's a version of Dale Gribble that the show presents in the first few minutes of most episodes. An overconfident, poorly built man who has 35-pound bench press numbers and a tendency to flee when actual danger arrives. A big talker, a coward in the specific moments where courage would be useful. That version is real. Dale genuinely can't lift very much. He does genuinely abandon people in danger sometimes. He is, by his own admission, not physically impressive, and the show is honest about this. But there's another version that emerges in certain episodes and certain contexts, and it's worth making a proper case for because I think it gets undervalued in conversations about the character. Dale Gribble is in specific and meaningful ways genuinely competent, and the evidence is better than you might expect. Start with the extermination business. Dale's Dead Bug is not a legally registered American corporation. The company checks read a Liberian registered company, which is either a tax structure or a piece of Dalian paranoia, possibly both. And Dale himself is not licensed or certified in the ways that a professional exterminator probably should be. But the man knows bugs, he understands pest behavior, life cycles, entry points, the specific relationship between particular species and particular environments. When the stakes are a serious infestation rather than a theoretical one, he tends to sort it out. Not always cleanly, not always without collateral damage to the surrounding property, but the bugs end up dealt with. There's also the Corporate Hatchet Man episode, which is one of the more revealing things the show does with Dale. When the chemicals he uses for a roach job compromise his ability to work as an exterminator temporarily, he takes a corporate job, specifically a job firing people. He's given the task of letting employees go, and it turns out he's spectacular at it. Not in a warm, supportive way, in an efficient, unflinching, completely effective way. He can fire someone with a clarity and composure that the people who are actually supposed to do this job in the company cannot manage. He does it without flinching, without hesitating, without the social awkwardness that makes this particular task so difficult for most people. The reason, if you think about it, makes sense. Dale doesn't care about hierarchies or social convention or the way things are supposed to be done. He has no anxiety about breaking a norm because he doesn't particularly respect most norms. The emotional calculus that makes firing someone hard the concern about being disliked, the awareness of professional relationships, the worry about how it reflects on you, none of that registers for Dale in a normal way. He can do the thing that needs doing because he's not carrying the weight that makes it hard. His research capabilities are genuinely impressive. The problem isn't his ability to gather and synthesize information. He's clearly very good at that, given the depth and specificity of his conspiracy theories. The problem is entirely about where that capability is pointed. Imagine Dale's research skills applied to something true. He'd be formidable. There's a specific moment in the show where Peggy falls for what turns out to be an IQ test diploma mill, a scam selling meaningless certifications. Dale sees through it immediately. His years of conspiracy theory research have made him excellent at recognizing the patterns of a scam. The inflated claims, the fake credibility markers, the way the pitch is structured to make you feel special for being chosen. He can spot it because he spent so long studying similar architectures, even if those studies were misdirected. His preparation for emergencies is also genuinely competent, within the framework of the emergencies he expects. The supplies are real, the survival knowledge is real. His Y2K preparations in Hillenium, stockpiling a large supply of Mountain Dew, which is admittedly a particular choice of survival resource, are based on genuine prepper logic, just applied to a scenario that didn't materialize. And then there's pocket sand. Pocket sand, the sudden throwing of sand from a pocket into an opponent's eyes, is played entirely as comedy, and the visual is objectively funny. But Dale commits to it with absolute conviction. He calls it out loud, pocket sand, before doing it, which undermines the element of surprise somewhat, but his belief in the technique is total. And honestly, throwing particulate matter into someone's eyes is a legitimate diversion tactic with a long history. Dale has stumbled onto something real through whatever chain of reasoning led him to keep sand in his pocket. The broader point, Dale's intelligence is not absent. It's present and reasonably substantial. It's been largely captured by a belief system that reroutes it away from useful destinations. What he does with his capability is consistently wrong. But the capability is there. And in the moments where the belief system isn't in the way, the corporate firing, the scam recognition, the actual extermination work when it matters, it shows up clearly. He is also, for what it's worth, the only person in the Manitoba Cigarettes gift catalog to have claimed every single item. He smoked enough to accumulate points for an entire catalog's worth of rewards. That's not really competence so much as dedication. But at a certain level, those aren't entirely different things. Now, the extermination business is Dale's primary occupation, but it would be a mistake to think of it as the full scope of his professional life. Dale is also a licensed bounty hunter, which is a detail the show establishes and then returns to periodically, and which I think tells you something interesting about how Dale thinks of himself. Bounty hunting, as a profession, sits in a peculiar legal space. It involves pursuing and apprehending people who have skipped bail, which is not the same as being a law enforcement officer. Bounty hunters operate outside the regular state apparatus to some degree, doing work adjacent to the justice system without quite being part of it. For someone with Dale's political convictions, this is probably ideal. He gets to operate in a quasi-official capacity, catch people, potentially do something that feels significant, all without being a government employee. He's enforcement adjacent. He's not the institution. He's adjacent to the institution in a way that lets him participate while maintaining plausible deniability about being a participant. Whether Dale has ever successfully apprehended anyone through his bounty hunting license is not something the show dwells on particularly. The license is more important than the practice. It's a credential. It's also a credential that comes from the state, which he would normally refuse to acknowledge. But bounty hunting is one of those areas where Dale's principles seem to bend just enough to accommodate the professional identity he wants. Then there's the radio station. At some point, Dale acquired a low-power radio transmitter and launched a talk station. The station served, by his own description, the entire Tri-House area, which is to say a very small number of listeners, almost certainly limited to his immediate neighbors and possibly not all of them. He set it up Art Bell style, which is a reference to the late-night radio host who built a massive audience for paranormal and conspiracy programming in the 1990s. Art Bell is, in some ways, a version of what Dale might have become if he had better equipment and lived somewhere with a larger population. The show notes that he eventually ran out of things to talk about on the air. This is, in retrospect, fairly surprising given the depth of Dale's content catalog. He has theories about almost everything. He has the peanut theory, and the beast, and the postal service organ operation, and the pyramids. He has personal opinions about dozens of subjects. Running out of material seems impossible. And yet, I suspect what happened was that Dale, removed from the ambient feedback of Hank's patient exasperation and Bill's resigned acceptance and Boomhauer's incomprehensible murmurs, found that his material deflated slightly without an audience who was at least present if not quite paying attention. His theories require reaction, even the wrong kind of reaction, even Hank saying, "I tell you what, Dale," in a tone that suggests he is reconsidering the friendship. The radio station offered no reaction at all, just dead air. He sold the transmitter to Mexican interests, specifically his friend Octavio, and that was that. He also put out an irregular newsletter called the Gribble Report, which presumably covered his key theoretical positions and any updates on ongoing investigations he was running. Hank was at some point specifically asked not to send the Gribble Report to Cotton Hill, which suggests the newsletter contained content that Hank considered inappropriate for his father, or possibly that Hank feared his father would agree with it, which is arguably more alarming. Dale's musical career deserves at least a paragraph, if only because the range of it is unexpected. His resume includes a stint with the Propaniacs, a band built around propane-themed music, which is exactly as specific and wonderful as it sounds. He was also at various points associated with Big Mountain Fudge Cake, which is a band name that sounds like something someone came up with immediately and never reconsidered, and the Dale Gribble Bluegrass Experience, which suggests a degree of formal musical identity. His principal instrument is the electronic keyboard. I don't know how good Dale is at the electronic keyboard. The show doesn't go deeply into his musical abilities, but the fact that he has a principal instrument and that he's been in multiple bands across multiple genres in what is by most accounts a fairly quiet Texas suburban life is another piece of the picture of a man who has a lot going on inside his own head and is always looking for somewhere to put it. His survivalist preparations are also worth a mention here because they overlap with his hobbies in interesting ways. Dale stockpiles supplies. He has cartons of cigarettes in his basement. He becomes deeply emotional if these are ruined. And he stockpiled barrels of Mountain Dew in advance of Y2K, working from the reasonable premise that in a civilization collapse scenario, one needs to be hydrated. He has various survival plans for various apocalyptic scenarios. He has presumably designed his home with some consideration for defensibility. The Mountain Dew stockpile is particularly Dale. It's not the first choice of most survivalists who tend to go for water and canned goods. But Dale's relationship with Mountain Dew is clearly personal rather than merely practical. He mentions that his kidneys like it, which is a fascinating and unprovable claim, so including it in the survival preparations makes sense from his perspective. If you're surviving an apocalypse, you should have things you actually want to consume. What the range of his pursuits adds up to is a picture of someone who has a great deal of creative energy with nowhere particularly organized to put it. The extermination business channels some of it. The theories channel some of it. The bounty hunting license and the radio station and the newsletter and the bands are all additional overflow valves. Dale needs to be doing things. He needs projects. He's not built for inactivity, even if his projects tend not to connect to anything very useful. Hank Hill is a man who finds purpose in the quality of his propane work, and that specificity sustains him. Dale finds purpose in the breadth of his investigations, and that breadth is what consumes him. two different relationships with time and meaning and what it means to be doing something worthwhile. Standing next to each other in the alley with a beer every evening, not quite understanding each other in any formal sense, but there nonetheless. It's tempting to call Dale Gribble a libertarian and leave it there because that label does a reasonable job of capturing the broad shape of his political worldview. He doesn't trust the government. He believes in the Second Amendment with a fervor that borders on religious. He thinks personal sovereignty is paramount. He distrusts institutions. These are recognizable positions on a recognizable part of the political spectrum. But Dale's politics are weirder and more personal than libertarian quite covers. He doesn't really operate within a political framework so much as he operates within a mood. The mood is, leave me alone, everything is a trap, I know better than the people who claim to be in charge, and also I have printed my own currency. Let's talk about the currency. Dale occasionally prints his own money, which features Hank Hill's face on what he refers to as the 100 Gribble bill. I love this detail because it captures something essential about how Dale's anti-government stance actually works in practice. He's not trying to build an alternative economic system. He's not making a coherent monetary policy argument. He just made some money with his friend's face on it. It exists somewhere in his house. He has presumably attempted to use it. The 100 Gribble bill is Dale's politics in miniature. The genuine conviction that official systems are illegitimate, expressed through an action that is entirely personal, practically useless, and slightly inscrutable to everyone else. He doesn't vote. The episode, The Perils of Polling, establishes this. His reasoning is presumably somewhere along the lines of, the electoral system is a mechanism of control. Voting legitimizes it. Therefore, non-participation is the correct stance. This is a coherent libertarian-adjacent position. The problem is that it means a man who thinks very deeply about governance has no direct mechanism for influencing it. He has taken himself out of the game and then complains loudly about the game from the sideline. He doesn't pay taxes on his extermination income. His company is registered in Liberia, so it is not a legally operating firm in the United States. He runs away and sweats heavily whenever the IRS comes to his door. These are all consistent. What makes them funny is the other side of the ledger. He also collects unemployment benefits under the name Rusty Shackelford. He has, at various points, received welfare payments from the very government apparatus he considers his enemy, using a fake name so that the fake name gets the benefit rather than the real him. The circularity of this is extraordinary. Dale has constructed a situation where he extracts resources from the government while technically not existing within it. He gets the money, but the money doesn't go to Dale Gribble. It goes to Rusty, and Rusty is a stolen identity, not his own invention. So Dale, in his own accounting, has not compromised his principles. The government isn't helping Dale. The government is helping Rusty. Dale is fine. His guns are the most straightforward expression of his politics. He's the president of the Arlen Gun Club. He has a collection ranging from pistols to automatic weapons. He's a licensed bounty hunter, which is one of those occupations that exists at the intersection of personal sovereignty and official recognition, that Dale tends to navigate without apparent cognitive dissonance. He once said, "Guns don't kill people, the government does," which is his version of a political position and also a surprisingly pithy summation of his worldview. What's interesting about Dale's gun ownership specifically is that it's one of the areas where he's actually engaged with the official system, licensed, registered in at least some respects, while maintaining the framing that this is about personal freedom rather than civic participation. He uses the structures he needs and rejects the ones he finds inconvenient. Most people do some version of this. Dale just does it more transparently than most. There's a fan reading of Dale's politics that I find genuinely compelling, which is that his libertarianism isn't a thought-through philosophy so much as it's a personality trait that found a political language. His real creed is something like, "I want to be left alone and I don't trust anyone in authority, and I will decide for myself what's true." That's not really libertarianism in the formal sense. It's something more personal and more stubborn than any ism can fully capture. What's underneath all of it, the currency and the alias and the non-voting and the Liberian registration, is a very deep-seated sense that the official world is rigged, that people in authority are not honest about what they're doing, and that the only reasonable response is to operate outside those structures as much as possible while quietly using them when necessary. Given what we know about Dale's history, a father living a hidden life, the early development of paranoia, the sense since childhood that adults were not telling the whole truth, you can see how that creed would take root and grow. He's not stupid. He noticed early that things weren't what they appeared to be. He just never developed the tools to calibrate which things were false and which were simply not what they appeared because adult life is complicated. The result is Dale Gribble, a man who has opted out of the official world as much as a person living in a suburban house with a wife and a son and a van with an ant on top can possibly opt out, which is not very much as it turns out, but he's given it a real go. Let's talk about the marriage itself, not the affair, not the biology, not what everyone around it knows and doesn't know, but the actual relationship between Dale and Nancy Hicks Gribble, because it's more interesting than it tends to get credit for. Nancy is a former beauty queen who became a local newsweather girl and eventually worked her way up to anchor at Channel 84 in Arlen. She's smart, presentable, professionally competent in a way that contrasts quite sharply with most of the adults around her on Rainy Street. She earns well. She manages the household finances. In material terms, she's probably carrying more of the domestic operation than Dale is, which is a dynamic the show is aware of without making a drama out of it. She also had a 14-year affair which produced her son, Joseph. Her mother, Bunny, had her own long-term affair, a generational pattern that Nancy only finds out about later, during a period of stress-induced hair loss over her unresolved feelings for John Redcorn. There's something quietly interesting there about inheritance, about what gets passed down in families not through genes but through patterns of behavior and the way people are taught to deal with longing and obligation. But here's what the show does that's genuinely surprising if you come to it expecting one thing. Dale's love for Nancy is not a joke. It's not played for irony, not undermined, not treated as pathetic or misplaced. He loves her, openly, completely, without qualification. He thinks she's the most beautiful woman in the world, and when her confidence in her appearance starts to falter, when she begins to feel her age in the way that the entertainment industry is particularly unkind about, Dale moves to fix it with a level of commitment that's almost startling. He decides to sue the cigarette company, his beloved cigarette company. The cigarettes that are one of his defining characteristics, the habit he has maintained since the 3rd grade, the thing he defends in essentially every context. He's even willing to take legal action against the company that makes them when he believes their secondhand smoke has harmed Nancy and jeopardized her livelihood, because he wants her to feel good about herself. What happens in court is better than what he planned. Dale performs too well in the legal proceedings. He's building a strong case, the kind that could result in a real payout. The cigarette company, nervous, offers him a substantial settlement, and Dale refuses it. He refuses the money. Instead, he uses the courtroom, with a room full of lawyers and press and interested parties watching, to tell Nancy publicly that he thinks she's the most beautiful woman in the world to him, that he doesn't want her to change anything, that the whole exercise wasn't about money, it was about her. He threw away real money to make a public declaration of love to his wife in front of people who were specifically there because he'd been building an effective legal case against a corporation. It is, on any reasonable metric, an absurd and impractical romantic gesture. It is also absolutely sincere. Dale does not do things insincerely. That's the core of the Gribble marriage, I think. It's not balanced in conventional ways. Nancy earns more. Nancy manages more. Nancy has been carrying a secret for 14 years that Dale isn't supposed to know. But Dale's devotion to her is constant, unglamorous, and real. He doesn't question it. He doesn't modulate it based on how things are going. He worships the ground she walks on, as the TV tropes page for his character literally states, and the show depicts this as something you can't entirely dismiss. The affair ends, as we talked about in the John Redcorn section, because Redcorn befriends Dale and can't go on deceiving someone he actually likes. Nancy then becomes, in the show's framing, a faithful wife. The unresolved feelings linger. Her mother's similar affair is surfaced during a period of stress over those feelings, but the behavior stops. And the show does something with that ending that's not entirely comfortable, but is probably honest. Nancy stays. Not because Dale is perfect, not because the marriage is uncomplicated, but because it's real and it's hers. And Dale's love for her is the most consistent thing in her life. The vow renewal, which happens about 20 years after the wedding, is also the occasion that brings Bug back into the picture, so it serves two storylines simultaneously. But as a gesture between Dale and Nancy, it means something. He wanted to do it. He showed up for it. He brings an emotional simplicity to the relationship that Nancy's more complicated inner life doesn't always have access to. What the Gribble marriage actually is, when you look at it clearly, is a love story of a particular and unusual kind. It's the story of a deeply eccentric, fundamentally well-meaning man who is committed absolutely to a woman who has, for a long period of her life, been giving part of herself somewhere else. And despite everything, the affair, the secret, the years of something that could reasonably be called betrayal, his love for her doesn't flicker. It just keeps going, which is either a testament to the strength of what he feels or evidence of how deeply his blind spots run, or both. King of the Hill doesn't answer that question cleanly. It just lets both things be true at the same time. In August 2023, Johnny Hardwick died at his home in Austin, Texas. He was 64. Hardwick had come to King of the Hill through an unusual route. He'd spent years working as a bartender and then as a stand-up comedian, doing festival and television appearances, building a voice that had something specific in it, something Texan and obvious and very particular to that world. He was briefly offered a sitcom deal by NBC that never materialized. Then Greg Daniels saw him perform a set about his Texan father at the Laugh Factory in Los Angeles and approached him about the show. At first, Hardwick was meant to be a writer. He knew the world King of the Hill was trying to capture, and that knowledge was what Daniels wanted in the room. Then Daniel Stern, who had been negotiating to voice Dale Gribble, didn't work out. And Hardwick ended up with the voiceover job too. The voice he created for Dale is genuinely difficult to describe if you haven't heard it. It's nasal and raspy and always carrying a slight edge of excitement, as if Dale is perpetually about to share something he's worked out that you haven't. It has a quality of compressed information, like the man speaking has so many theories queued up that he can't quite get through all of them at a reasonable pace. It's a voice that makes completely absurd things sound like they've been carefully considered, and that makes completely considered things sound slightly dangerous. It was irreplaceable in the literal sense of the word, and Hardwick's death was felt by the show's community in a way that went beyond the usual reaction to the loss of a voice actor. Hardwick had spent some of the years after the original show ended doing YouTube videos as Dale, covering songs in character, occasionally brandishing firearms in ways that felt entirely appropriate for Dale Gribble, which meant there was an ongoing relationship between him and the character and between him and the fans that didn't end when the show did in 2010. He stayed in the alley, so to speak. The revival, which landed on Hulu beginning in 2025 as season 14, was already in development, and he was able to record material for it before his death. Mike Judge confirmed that Hardwick would appear in 6 episodes of the new season, which means that for 6 episodes, the original Dale Gribble voice returns one more time, and then it doesn't. That's a strange and particular kind of grief to build into a television season, and the show has handled it with what seems like real care. Toby Huss took over the voice for the remaining episodes and the ongoing revival. Huss has spoken about this with considerable respect for what he's taking on. Johnny was one of a kind and a wonderful fellow. I'm not trying to copy Johnny. I guess I'm trying to be Johnny. He laid down a really wonderful goofball character. He had a lot of weird heart to him, and that's a credit to Johnny. So all I'm trying to do is hold on to his Dale-ness. Hold on to his Dale-ness is a good way to put it. The specific voice is gone, but the character, the particular combination of sincerity and paranoia and genuine love wrapped in a lot of very questionable theories, that's still there. The revival has given Dale new conspiracies for a new era. Based on what's been shown, he's apparently fixated on soccer's growing presence in Arlen, and at some point has kidnapped Hank in connection with a theory about what this means. The board in Dale's basement, visible in the kidnapping scene, apparently has content on it suggesting he believes Hank has been replaced by an alien or turned into a government sleeper agent. So the core behavior is intact. Dale is still the man who looks at an obvious thing and sees a hidden hand. The show coming back 13 years after its original end is itself a kind of statement about how the characters landed with people. King of the Hill has had a long afterlife in streaming, in memes, in the specific way certain lines from the show became cultural shorthand. Dale's pocket sand is probably the most viral moment. The absurdity of the call-out combined with the complete commitment to the technique makes it the kind of clip that spreads without needing explanation. But the whole show has held up in a way that surprised people who assumed it was purely a product of its original moment. Dale Gribble specifically has resonated in ways that go beyond nostalgia. There's a version of him that works as pure comedy, the paranoid idiot who misses the obvious. But there's the other version too, the devoted father who loves the wrong theories, the loyal friend who would do almost anything for the people on his street, the man who prints currency with his best friend's face on it because he cannot in good conscience use the official version. That version is genuinely compelling, and it's probably why people keep returning to him. He's a specific kind of American figure, done with a lot of affection and a lot of accuracy. And apparently there's still more of his story to tell. The alley is the show's central space. Not the Hill House, not Strickland Propane, not the various locations that come and go across the seasons. The alley with its wooden fence and its concrete and its cans of Alamo beer is where King of the Hill lives. And of the four men who stand there every evening, Dale's presence in the dynamic is the most complicated and in some ways the most interesting. His friendship with Hank Hill is the anchor. It's also, if you look at it honestly, a slightly mysterious thing. Hank is a man of conventional values and specific decencies. He believes in doing things correctly. He believes in propane. He believes in Arlen, in neighborliness, in showing up for people in the particular way that people show up for each other in a certain kind of Texan suburb. He is, by any reasonable measure, the opposite of Dale Gribble in almost every value that matters. And yet they are genuinely best friends, not just neighbors who tolerate each other. Friends in the real sense, the kind where you know what the other person's particular sorrows are, and where their particular limits are, and what to do when things go wrong for them. Hank's patience with Dale is extraordinary and quietly heroic. The theories, the alias, the various projects that become other people's problems, Hank absorbs all of this with the steadiness of someone who has decided that this person is worth it and has not revisited that decision in decades. He gets frustrated. He says, "I tell you what," in a tone that suggests he is not entirely pleased. He sometimes steers Dale away from things before they become worse. But he doesn't leave. He's standing in the alley every evening. What Hank gets from Dale is something the show touches on without making a large thing of. Dale is interesting. Hank's world is, by design, fairly narrow in its categories and expectations. Dale is perpetually outside every category. He does things Hank would never do and thinks things Hank would never think, and operates on logic that Hank cannot quite follow. And for a man as settled in his ways as Hank is, that has a kind of value. Dale is the alley's wild card, its variation, its evidence that the world is bigger than propane and football. Dale's treatment of Bill Doe-Treve is notably less charitable than his treatment of Hank, and this is one of the places where the show acknowledges without softening that Dale can be genuinely unkind. He takes nearly every opportunity to insult Bill. The insults are rarely clever. They tend to target Bill's divorce, his weight, his general sadness, and they go on even when Bill is clearly at a low point. The dynamic has a quality of someone who has decided that one member of the group is safe to kick and has been kicking for years. Through a combination of habit and a complete absence of self-examination about it. The show doesn't let this go entirely unaddressed, but it also doesn't make a resolution of it. It's part of the texture of the alley. Bill is sad and Dale is unkind about it, and Hank winces and Boomhauer observes, and the evening continues. Real friendships contain dynamics like this. People who have known each other so long that patterns of behavior that should have been addressed decades ago have simply become the furniture of the relationship. Then there's Boomhauer. Boomhauer, full name Jeffrey Dexter Boomhauer III, a detail the show reveals and then mostly doesn't use, is the fourth man in the alley. And his relationship with Dale is as much about complementary incomprehensibility as anything else. They're both people who are not quite fully legible to their social environment, just in completely different ways. Dale is too loud and too specific and too present. Boomhauer is too fast and too ambient and too constant. In combination, they create a certain kind of noise in the alley that Hank manages to stand in the middle of for 30 years without entirely going mad. There's an episode where it's revealed that Boomhauer is actually a Texas Ranger, a proper government law enforcement officer, which is one of the show's genuinely impressive long game reveals. Boomhauer has been, the whole time, employed by a state law enforcement agency of the sort Dale considers most suspect. The implications for Dale's worldview, if he ever properly absorbed this information, are fascinating to contemplate. One of his closest friends for 30 years standing in the alley working for the government. The alley itself is worth a paragraph. It's a recurring point of discussion whether the King of the Hill alley is a realistic piece of Texas suburban geography or an idealized space, a kind of stage set for the show's central conversation. In reality, alley socializing of this kind was apparently a real thing in certain Texas suburbs of the era the show depicts. People did gather in the alley. It was a specific social location. The show inherited it and made it mythological. What the alley does for Dale specifically is give him an audience that is simultaneously captive and dismissive, which is the perfect audience for his kind of content. Hank won't engage but won't walk away. Bill is half listening, half absorbed in his own sadness. Boomhauer responds with something, though what that something is remains open to interpretation. Dale can theorize into this space indefinitely without consequence and without resolution, which is probably exactly what he needs. The alley is, in its way, Dale's therapy, not in the sense of producing insight or change, but in the sense of providing a regular outlet that keeps everything moving without requiring actual confrontation with anything. 3 evenings a week, he comes out, opens a beer, says something unhinged, and is neither fully accepted nor fully rejected. The world continues. The beer is cold. The ant on the Bugabago rotates. There's a real warmth underneath the comedy of the alley scenes, and it's most visible in the episodes where the group's dynamic is disrupted, when someone is absent, or when a conflict between them becomes serious enough to actually matter. Those episodes work as well as they do because the show has spent enough time just showing the alley working, showing 4 people standing in a space together at the end of a Texas day, that you've come to understand what it means to each of them. It means something to Dale, possibly more than he'd ever admit, and definitely more than his stated philosophy about the meaninglessness of official institutions would suggest. He's in the alley every evening. That's not nothing. That's actually quite a lot. The show had a long run, and Dale appears in virtually all of it in some capacity. But certain episodes belong specifically to him, episodes where the primary action revolves around what Dale believes or does or gets wrong in a specifically illuminating way. It's worth going through a few of these because they reveal different facets of the character that the alley scenes can only gesture at. To Kill a Ladybird is one of the more emotionally complex Dale episodes in the show's run. A raccoon attacks Ladybird and Dale, which leads Hank to believe the raccoon may have been rabid. When Dale interacts with the raccoon and it scratches him, the question of rabies becomes urgent. And Dale, terrified he has been infected, bolts into the woods where his paranoia soon spirals out of control. He goes out into the wilderness instead to live the last of his days in nature. The episode works for a few reasons. One is that Dale's decision to go into the woods rather than accept a medically administered solution is entirely consistent with everything we know about him. Of course, he would rather face potential death in the wilderness than submit to a government medical protocol. The other reason is that the episode gives him a surprisingly graceful moment in the wild. He's not incompetent out there. He manages. He has genuine survival instincts. And the eventual resolution involves Dale coming back not because his paranoia breaks, but because his new raccoon friends turn on him and send him running back home. Soldier of Misfortune is often cited as one of the best Dale-centric episodes, and it earns its reputation. Dale is the president of the Arlen Gun Club, a militia-adjacent organization of like-minded men who take his theories seriously and give him the kind of respectful attention he rarely gets in the alley. The episode plays with what happens to Dale when his delusions are validated rather than politely ignored, and the answer is that he gets worse. Unchecked conspiracy thinking, given social reinforcement, expands. He becomes more grandiose, more certain, more removed from the reality the people around him can see. The underlying sadness of the episode is that Dale clearly wants this. He wants to be believed. He wants to be right. He wants a room full of people who think the things he thinks rather than standing in an alley while Hank says, "I tell you what." And when he gets that, it doesn't make him happy. It makes him more unhinged. The validation he wanted turns out to be the last thing that helps him. Dale to the Chief has a political dimension that ages interestingly. Dale is, at the start of the episode, deeply anti-American. Not in the complex, critical sense, but in the conspiratorial sense, convinced that the United States government is an apparatus of control that must be resisted. Then, through a series of events that the episode handles with real comedy, he ends up briefly converted into a proud American patriot. The reversal is played for laughs, but it also reveals something about the relationship between Dale's anti-government stance and his actual identity. He's not fundamentally anti-American in any ideological sense. He's anti-control, anti-deception, anti the specific mechanisms by which he believes power operates. America as an idea he has some attachment to. It's the institutions that get in the way of that idea that he can't stand. The Exterminator is worth mentioning because it establishes something about Dale's professional identity that matters. The show gives him an episode that's largely about his work, firing people at an office job, and it turns out to be something he's genuinely invested in. There's a version of Dale that could have been entirely defined by the conspiracy theories and the alias. This episode is the reminder that he has an actual vocation and that it means something to him, and that Dale's dead bug employee of the year with his own name on it, except for the year listed under Rusty Shackelford, is a point of pride rather than a joke. Of Mice and Little Green Men, which we discussed in the Does Dale Know section, is the most studied Dale episode from a character analysis perspective for obvious reasons. But outside the Joseph/alien theory, the episode also contains a lovely piece of character work in Dale's relationship to the idea of fatherhood itself. He's invested in it, he's thought about it, he has in some sense built his identity around being Joseph's father in the same way he's built his identity around being Rusty Shackelford, or around being a bounty hunter. These identities are real to him, they're not costumes. they're the things he is. Peggy's Gone to Pots, the Rusty Shackelford episode, has a B plot and an A plot that don't obviously connect until the end, when both characters, Dale and Peggy, have to confront the consequences of identities they've constructed around something untrue. Peggy has presented herself as a competent businesswoman in a domain where she isn't one. Dale has built 30 years of identity around a dead classmate who isn't dead. In both cases, the correction comes from outside, not from inside. Both of them need someone else's arrival to force the reckoning. That's a specific and honest thing about how certain kinds of self-deception work, and the show noticed it. There's a recurring episode structure that Dale gets more often than most characters, which is Dale is wrong about a big thing, and the episode ends without him fully understanding that he was wrong, but with things more or less resolved anyway. It's a structure the show uses carefully. A true lesson-learning ending, Dale sits down and properly understands what he got wrong and adjusts his worldview, would feel false to the character. The better ending is Dale walking away still convinced of his original position, but with the problem somehow solved regardless. The world accommodated him this time. It doesn't necessarily next time, and he doesn't know the difference. That structure is, when you think about it, a relatively honest portrait of how most people process being wrong about something they're deeply invested in. You don't get a clean moment of realization. You get the situation changing around you and you fitting your interpretation of what happened to the theory you already had. Dale is an extreme version of this, but the mechanism is recognizable. We've spent a long time going through the specific things, the theories, the alias, the father, the marriage, the friendship, the episodes. Let me try to pull some of it together now. Not as a conclusion exactly, but as a way of thinking about what the show is doing with this character at a level slightly above the individual detail. There's a version of the Dale Gribble interpretation that treats him as primarily a joke, the paranoid guy, the one whose theories are always wrong, the comic foil to Hank's decency. And this version isn't entirely wrong. Dale is funny, his theories are frequently ridiculous, and the gap between his certainty and his accuracy is a reliable source of comedy across the entire run of the show. But the show never quite settles for only that. What it does consistently across 13 seasons is position Dale in a way that asks you to take his feelings seriously, even when you can't take his conclusions seriously. His distrust is real distrust, rooted in something. His love for Nancy and Joseph is real love, not undermined by the circumstances around it. His friendships, however odd the dynamics, mean something to him and to the people he's friends with. King of the Hill was made by people who grew up in or around the specific culture it depicts, and there's a quality to its treatment of the characters that comes from that familiarity. Hank Hill is not a punchline. Bill Doe-Treve is not just the sad one. Dale Gribble is not just the conspiracy nut. They are drawn with the specificity of people who have actually encountered these kinds of people and know what goes on underneath the surface type. What goes on underneath Dale is something the show returns to repeatedly without fully resolving. A man who has good instincts about the world, that power is not transparent, that institutions do not always act in the public interest, that the official story is often incomplete, but who has processed those instincts through a framework that turns them into noise. He's not hallucinating, he's pattern matching against real patterns. He's just catastrophically wrong about where the patterns lead. There's something almost generous about the show's treatment of that kind of thinking. It would have been easy to make Dale simply ridiculous, a flat caricature of paranoia. What it does instead is show you how a person gets there. A childhood with a father who is present until marriage drives them apart. The early development of a worldview that says adults are not honest about what's underneath things. The accumulation of theories that feels, from inside them, like the accumulation of evidence. The community of people who share those theories and provide the social reinforcement that keeps them going. Dale's worldview is wrong, but it has an interior logic. It grew somewhere. The show also uses Dale to make a specific and interesting point about what conspiracy thinking costs the person who does it. Dale's energy, and he has a lot of it, he's restless and busy and always in the middle of something, goes almost entirely into the wrong places. The research he does, the monitoring, the alias, the preparations, the newsletter, the theories, the radio station, all of this is mostly real work. Real time and attention and cognitive effort, pointed almost entirely away from the things that actually matter in his immediate life. The affair he doesn't know about. The father he didn't speak to for decades. The friendship with Hank that he takes slightly for granted because Hank's patience seems inexhaustible. These things sit in his immediate vicinity and receive almost none of his investigative energy. The beast is a global information conspiracy. Nancy is calling John Redcorn. Both things are happening in Dale's world simultaneously. He has a theory about the beast. I don't think the show is making a political argument about conspiracy theories as such. It's not a polemic. It's not saying, look at this idiot. What it's saying is something more like, this is where human attention can go. This is what happens when a real and valid sense that things are not as they appear gets decoupled from the specific things that are not as they appear in your actual life. The suspicion metastasizes. It becomes about everything except the things that are actually happening. And underneath that always is the love. Dale loves Nancy and Joseph and the friends in the alley and his ridiculous boogabago with the rotating ant. He loves his cigarettes to a degree that is probably clinically significant. He loves having a radio station, even one that serves 3 houses. He is, underneath the noise and the theories and the alias, a person who wants to matter to the people around him, and mostly does, in the specific, crooked way that Dale Gribble can matter to people. The show doesn't make him fix this. He doesn't arrive at clarity. He doesn't resolve the contradiction between his investigation of global conspiracies and his complete blindness to the personal ones. He stands in the alley at the end of every episode with the same sunglasses on and the same cigarette in his hand and the same amount of conviction about things that are almost certainly not true. But he's there. He shows up, he's in the alley every evening, which is, for Dale Gribble, about as grounded as it gets. One of the quieter things King of the Hill does with Dale is use him to explore what it looks like when a person's fundamental orientation toward the world is essentially fixed. Other characters in the show have arcs. Hank softens in small ways over 13 seasons. Bobby grows. Even Bill occasionally shifts. But Dale is recognizably the same man at the end of the series as he is at the beginning. Same sunglasses, same cigarette, same theories, same alias, same position in the alley. This isn't presented as a failure exactly, it's just a fact about him. Some people are, in their essential character, stable in ways that resist the usual narrative logic of change and growth. Dale is one of them. What makes this interesting is what happens around him. The world changes, slowly and steadily, in ways that Dale's framework doesn't quite accommodate. The internet arrives in Arlen and becomes ubiquitous. The political landscape shifts. Surveillance technology develops to the point where his theories about the beast stop sounding like theories and start sounding like reporting. The people around him get older, change jobs, gain and lose things that matter to them. And Dale processes all of it through the same lens he's been carrying since 3rd grade. There's a specific texture this gives the later seasons. By the time you're in season 10 or 11, you have a strong sense of who Dale is and what he's going to do in any given situation. The unpredictability of the character, which was part of his initial energy, has settled into something more like the comfortable predictability of a person you know well. You can say, if you know Dale, here is how he will interpret this event. He will identify an institution behind it. He will propose a mechanism that implicates either the government or an extraterrestrial party. He will be very confident. He will be almost entirely wrong. But comfortable predictability isn't a criticism of the show's writing. It's an accurate description of certain people. The friend you've known for 20 years, who has the same response to every piece of news. the family member whose interpretation of any situation is immediately legible to you because they've been interpreting situations the same way since you can remember. There's a kind of warmth in that legibility even when you disagree with the interpretation. You know this person, they are knowable. Not everyone is. The revival leans into this by putting Dale into a genuinely new situation, soccer in Arlen, which is 2025-era suburban Texas, in a way that the original show's suburban Texas wasn't, and showing that his response is the same response scaled to a new stimulus. There's presumably an institution behind the soccer. There's presumably a reason someone wants Arlen's children playing a sport that originates from somewhere else. The theory will be different in its specifics. The structure will be the same as every other theory he's ever had. 30 years from the pilot, and Dale Gribble is still the man with the sand in his pocket. This is either a tragedy or it's who he is, and the show has always implicitly argued for the latter. One thing the revival does, which is worth noting, is acknowledge that time has passed without making the characters into different people. Hank is older, Bobby is grown, but the alley is still the alley, and the beer is still Alamo, and the four men standing there are still recognizably themselves. Dale's new conspiracy is about soccer. The form of the thing has not changed. There's something comforting about that for the audience, which is probably part of the point of a revival. You return to a place you know. The furniture is where you left it. The man in the orange cap is still wearing the sunglasses. Whatever is happening in the wider world, in whatever year you're watching this, Dale has a theory about it. And the theory is wrong, and he's going to tell Hank about it over a beer. And Hank is going to be right there, listening, not quite agreeing, not walking away. That's the alley, that's King of the Hill, and that's Dale Alvin Gribble, who was born on July 12th, who has been smoking Manitoba cigarettes since the 3rd grade, who loves his wife unconditionally and his son without question, and his theories with a conviction that nothing has ever fully dented. Good night again. Something that doesn't get discussed enough is how specifically Dale talks. Not the content of his theories, but the actual shape of his speech, the phrases, the rhythms, the specific verbal habits that are so particular to him that they've migrated out of the show entirely and become cultural reference points on their own. Pocket sand is the most obvious example. The calling out of one's own defensive maneuver before executing it is, from a tactical standpoint, a significant flaw in the technique. The element of surprise is the whole point of throwing sand in someone's eyes. Announcing pocket sand gives your opponent approximately a second to close their eyes or turn away. And yet Dale does it every time with complete commitment, and the fact that he does is perfectly consistent with his character. He takes pride in his techniques. The verbal declaration is part of the performance of competence, which matters as much to Dale as the actual competence. Wingo as an exclamation of excitement is a Dale invention that the show deploys sparingly and perfectly. It's not a word that exists anywhere else. It came from somewhere inside Dale Gribble, and it does exactly what it needs to do. It signals pleasure, surprise on the good end, a small triumph. The fact that it's nonsense doesn't matter. Dale has always been comfortable with nonsense as a vehicle for meaning. See also Rusty Shackelford. Sgo, the compressed let's go he deploys when urgency is required, has a very specific energy to it. It's rushed in the same way that Dale is sometimes rushed, when a plan has suddenly moved faster than expected, or when something has gone sideways and retreat is indicated. It's the verbal equivalent of the physical cowardice that occasionally overtakes him, translated into sound. The need to exit condensed to 2 syllables. And then there's the she-she-sha, the signature sound of Dale being pleased with himself, which runs so fast that it resists transcription. It's the sound of a man who has just done something he considers elegant. It's followed by the look, the brief moment of self-satisfaction that Dale allows himself when a plan executes correctly, before the plan usually begins falling apart in some way he didn't account for. What these catchphrases share is that they're all self-contained. They don't require a response. They don't ask anything of the people nearby. They announce a state, readiness, pleasure, urgency, triumph, without opening a conversation about it. This is very Dale. His communication is frequently declarative in exactly this way. He states positions, announces theories, deploys names, and doesn't particularly need the acknowledgement of the people around him to feel that something has been communicated. The Rusty Shackelford alias is, in its own way, a catchphrase too, not in the sense of a repeated phrase, but in the sense of a verbal act that Dale performs so habitually and so specifically that it's as much a part of his speech as any single line. Rusty Shackelford, said into a phone or across a counter, has a quality of ritual about it by the show's middle seasons. The name is a performance. It sounds slightly different coming from Dale than any real name would, more deliberate, with a faint quality of someone remembering to say a word rather than saying their own name. And that quality is part of why it keeps failing to actually deceive anyone. Dale's language is the signature of a man who has built a very specific and internally consistent world and talks from inside it without entirely accounting for the people outside. His phrases are tuned for Dale's reality. They translate imperfectly into everyone else's. And yet they've spread into the world far beyond Arlen, Texas, which suggests that more people than you'd expect find something recognizable in the wavelength he's broadcasting on. So that's Dale Gribble, the man in the sunglasses who doesn't vote, doesn't pay taxes if he can help it, monitors all incoming calls, has a son he loves completely, and a father he didn't speak to for decades over a misunderstanding that turned out to be about something else entirely. The man who concluded that his wife's affair was alien insemination rather than an affair, and then raised the child of that conclusion with real devotion. The man who threw away a legal settlement because what he actually wanted was to say out loud in public, with lawyers watching, that his wife was beautiful. He's wrong about most things he believes. He's right about the shape of the world in ways that the show didn't fully know it was capturing when it made him. He's loyal and cowardly and funnier than he knows and sadder than he appears, and he has been smoking Manitoba cigarettes for a long time. There's something genuinely restful about spending time with this character, I think. King of the Hill is a show built on the rhythms of ordinary suburban life, the alley, the beer, the evenings that are mostly just evenings, and Dale is the show's acknowledgement that ordinary suburban life also contains people who are living in a completely different reality from everyone around them, and that those people are still loved, still belong somewhere, still stand in the same alley with the same friends and drink the same beer. He's the man at the corner of the fence with the sandwich. You know the one. Every neighborhood has one. Good night.